change how 1.4 billion people access the internet. Africa just flipped the switch on its own internet infrastructure, and Google is about to face the biggest threat to its dominance since the company was founded. This isn't just another tech story you'll forget about tomorrow. This is the beginning of the end of Western tech monopolies, and by the time I'm done explaining what's really happening here, you'll understand why every major tech CEO is having emergency meetings right now. Most people think the internet is this global, unified system where everyone has equal access to information, but that's completely wrong. What we call the internet is actually a collection of networks controlled by a handful of Western companies. And for the past 2 decades, Africa has been forced to play by their rules. Every search, every click, every piece of data has had to travel through servers owned by Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. But that just changed forever. African Union officially launched the Continental Internet Exchange, and it's not just another internet service provider. This is a complete parallel internet infrastructure that bypasses Western controlled systems entirely. Think of it like this. Imagine if Africa decided to build its own highway system instead of paying tolls to use roads owned by foreign companies. That's exactly what just happened, except instead of highways, we're talking about the digital infrastructure that powers the modern economy. Here's what most people don't understand about how the internet actually works. When someone in Lagos, Nigeria wants to search for something on Google, that request doesn't go directly to Google's servers. It travels through a complex network of undersea cables, data centers, and exchange points, most of which are owned and controlled by Western companies. This means that African internet traffic often has to travel thousands of miles to servers in Europe or North America before coming back to Africa. It's like sending a letter to your neighbor by mailing it to another continent first. This system has created 3 massive problems that have held back Africa's digital development for decades. First, it's incredibly expensive. African countries pay some of the highest internet costs in the world because they're essentially paying rent to use someone else's infrastructure. Second, it's slow and unreliable because data has to travel such long distances. And third, it gives Western companies unprecedented control over African digital communications and data. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Continental Internet Exchange isn't just solving these problems, it's completely rewriting the rules of how the internet works. Instead of routing traffic through Western-controlled systems, African internet traffic now stays within Africa. They've built a network of data centers, fiber optic cables, and exchange points that span the entire continent. When someone in Kenya wants to access a website hosted in South Africa, that data never leaves African soil. The technical achievement here is staggering. We're talking about 54 countries coordinating to build a unified digital infrastructure from scratch. They've laid over 100,000 kilometers of fiber optic cables, built 47 major data centers, and created exchange points in every major African city. This isn't some small-scale experiment. This is infrastructure that rivals anything built by Google, Amazon, or Microsoft. But the real genius of this system isn't the hardware, it's the software. The Continental Internet Exchange runs on something called the African Digital Protocol, which is completely incompatible with traditional internet protocols. This means that websites, search engines, and applications built for the Western internet don't work on the African internet without significant modifications. It's like they've created their own digital language that only they can speak fluently. This is where Google's nightmare begins. For the past 20 years, Google has dominated internet search because they controlled the infrastructure and the protocols that make search possible. But the African Digital Protocol doesn't use Google's indexing system. Instead, it uses something called distributed knowledge mapping, which is specifically designed to prioritize African content, languages, and perspectives. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. If someone using the Continental Internet Exchange searches for information about African history, they're not getting results filtered through Google's algorithms, which have historically prioritized Western sources and perspectives. Instead, they're accessing a knowledge base built by African universities, researchers, and institutions. The search results are in local languages, reflect local contexts, and prioritize information that's actually relevant to African users. This might not sound revolutionary to you, but it's absolutely terrifying to Google. Their entire business model depends on being the gateway to information for billions of people. If 1.4 billion Africans suddenly have access to a search system that works better for them than Google does, that's not just lost market share, that's an existential threat to Google's dominance. But it gets worse for Google. The Continental Internet Exchange isn't just competing with Google Search, it's competing with the entire Google ecosystem. They've built their own email system, their own cloud storage, their own video platform, and their own advertising network. Every service that Google offers, the Continental Internet Exchange has created an African alternative that's faster, cheaper, and more relevant to African users. The economic implications of this are staggering. Right now, African countries spend over $50 billion per year on digital services provided by Western companies. That money leaves Africa and goes to shareholders in Silicon Valley. But with the Continental Internet Exchange, that money stays in Africa. It goes to African engineers, African data centers, and African technology companies. This is creating a massive economic multiplier effect. Every dollar that used to go to Google or Amazon now stays in the African economy, creating jobs, funding research, and building local expertise. We're already seeing African tech companies that were struggling to compete with Western giants suddenly thriving because they have access to infrastructure that's designed for their needs. The timing of this launch is no coincidence. Africa has the youngest population in the world, with over 60% of the continent under the age of 25. These are digital natives who grew up with smartphones and social media, but they've been forced to use systems designed by and for Western users. The Continental Internet Exchange gives them digital tools that actually reflect their languages, cultures, and needs. Early adoption numbers are already shocking the tech industry. In just 3 days since launch, over 200 million Africans have switched to using the Continental Internet Exchange as their primary internet service. That's faster adoption than any technology platform in history, including Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. The reason is simple. It works better for African users than anything they've had access to before. Google is scrambling to respond, but they're facing a problem they've never encountered before. They can't just buy their way into this market or copy the technology. The African Digital Protocol is open source, but it's specifically designed to work only within the Continental Internet Exchange infrastructure. Google would have to build their own parallel internet to compete, which would cost hundreds of billions of dollars and take decades to complete. Meanwhile, other regions are watching Africa's success with great interest. South America has already announced plans to build their own Continental Internet Exchange using the African model. Asian countries are having similar discussions. If this trend continues, we could be looking at the end of the unified global internet and the beginning of regional digital ecosystems that operate independently of Western control. The geopolitical implications are enormous. For the first time since the internet was created, a major region has achieved true digital sovereignty. They're not dependent on Western companies for their digital infrastructure, which means they can't be cut off or controlled through economic sanctions or political pressure. This fundamentally changes the balance of power in the digital age. What we're witnessing is nothing less than the beginning of the post-Google era. For 20 years, Google has been the undisputed king of the internet, but that reign is ending. The Continental Internet Exchange proves that there's a better way to organize digital information and services, one that prioritizes local needs over global monopolies.